matters, how that's affecting food production, in belts like in the middle belt like Benue. We've seen the security matters there. So definitely he's urging security agents to ramp up, scuttling all of the security issues we see there. Then he talked about the reasons for elevated, inflation, even though we did see an easing there. High electricity prices and forex demand pressure. He also mentioned the U.S. trade policy tariffs and the positivity he's seen around the bank recapitalization, so far. So a lot, the governor unpacked, for us there. So it's unanimous. It's hold as expected, according to, consensus. And we still have right here Mr. Paul Alaje and Mr. Hakeem Mohammed. They've been helping us unpack the matters, so far. And I guess this is according to expectations, at this point. Let me come to you now, Mr. Hakeem. So this is exactly what was decided, last time. And I'm particular about, the CRR for deposit money banks and merchant banks. That's at 16%. So since the last decision, how has that decision impacted business? Like, I know you play in that, sector up till now. Yeah. What have you seen?
Well, I mean, they've implemented it, and we've seen them, mop up liquidity, at different times, So you remember that apart from the CRR, the central bank also has some other tools that they use. So every now and then they come into the market, they issue mobiles. But what this just tells us is, and in line with what we had said, earlier, that they probably would hold, and they want to see, what then happens. The governor mentioned when he was presenting that, he was quite happy with the moderation they are seeing in food inflation, and just like we also said, they are sort of okay or happy with the trajectory of inflation, and they believe that would naturally come down. And when that does happen, that then gives them a reason to then perhaps start considering whether to cut. For banks, I guess, to the extent that they are not touching all the key parameters, it means that things are probably going to stay where they are. We then just sort of see what then happens, because we're already comfortable or happy with what what they just read out again, because this is really what we've seen, I think, 2 MPCs ago, right? So we're not very, maybe not very impacted. But one of the things he said that I've also found maybe quite interesting is that the central bank seems to be happy also with the level of exchange rates. He sort of mentioned how they're fine with the rates, even despite what happened with the trade tariffs and all of the disruptions we saw back in April, that the Nigerian economy seems to have weathered the storm, in a very nice way.
Well, has the storm come?
Well, we did see some of it, in the aftermath of that. We actually saw quite a number of portfolio exits. But one of the reasons why we didn't really feel the full brunt was because of how proactive the central bank was around intervening to provide FX liquidity. Because if the CBN did not come into the market to provide the liquidity, you probably will see a lot more exits. Because again, these guys are just trying to test the waters, right? They have portfolios all over the world. Because of what was happening, there's always that flight to safety. Let's exit all markets, especially the emerging market. Let's take the dollars back to the US or the advanced economies. So, and they tried to do that. But to the extent that the central bank immediately stepped in to provide liquidity, I think that may have, stalled some people from pushing further. Because we did see some exits, but the central bank intervened, and we've seen them intervene, I probably would say 3-4 times every week since then, just to ensure that anyone who wanted to exit had liquidity, and to ensure that the disruption was minimal. So I think they did do that, and that's probably one of the reasons why we're not that impacted. The currency went as high as maybe 16.45, but it sort of traded around maybe 16 figure to 16.20 or so over the last 2-3 weeks, and we've seen that range maintained.
Right, and definitely that's good. When you see that range, being maintained, even though some of us are still finding it hard to get used to these current exchange rates. Some of us, I feel we're still trapped in somewhere around 600,
wow.
to the dollar, maybe 800. Some of us mentally, mentally,
the ship has sailed.
because but Mr. Alade, he unpacked a lot, there, and it's still within expectations at this point. What stuck out for you?
Well, for me, I think the bank will still have to deal with their 20% because for DMBs, cash reserve requirement or cash reserve ratio of 50%, which they will not have access to, their liquidity ratio will be 30%, 20% in the economy. So you see, economy is about trade-off, and it's about choices and picking the best, staying with the best alternatives. 100% of what you take to the bank, what is the meaning? Again, is that 50% goes to the bank, to the Apex Bank for your CRR. 30% is what bank cannot touch. 20% is what they can lend to people. Now, from this 20%, the rate at which you get it, the baseline is already shared. What does this mean? We still have high energy to combat inflation, which is what we have done. Now, because we still want to combat inflation, even though there is no increase in all of this, and arithmetic corridor remains the same, what it means is that interest rates, lending rates, or borrowing rate from banks will still be as it is, and it is still very high. The question is, with this high rate, are we able to achieve taming inflation? Are we able to bring down inflation? Now, the governor said that when you compare this year inflation with last year inflation, it reduced to about 23%. Actually, inflation did not reduce, according to the National Bureau of Statistics. It's not reduction that they are talking about. They are talking about a change in base year. It was over 30% based on the base year we were using last year. Now, econometricians will be very careful to call that reduction and to even make policy. So one thing I'm happy with is that we didn't use that figure to make decisions. As a matter of fact, in economics and in econometrics, we are going through a period of outliers number because the numbers will be until the Bureau of Statistics shows. The only thing that may make us make decision will be a very short term, which is month on month. We saw reduction in month on month from I think 1%, to about 3% to 1% inflation reduction on month. But that's too short period of time. You can make a national economic decision. It's too short, you cannot. But where is the real conversation? The real conversation here is that on one hand, we want inflation to go down. On the other hand, we want to have our economy expand. This is a trade-off. You cannot have the two consistently at the same time. So when you saw the policy today, I think Central Bank Governor gave hints that for things to be better, he didn't say it directly in that term. One, you need to have improved security. Number two, we need to pursue after economic balance more than having an improved Naira or reduction in the value of Naira. And what is most important is that as of now, we are doing relatively better in our term of trade and balance of payment. And he also noted what the international agency projection had on Nigeria. One of the persons that asked questions talked about Fitch report, which he said that is very significant for us. But remember that in his presentation directly, he has hinted about IMF reservation of Nigeria expected growth, unlike what we have now, above 3% to 3%, and the subsequent year, about 2.7 or 2.8%. And as a result, it's noted that the Apex Bank or the MPC will watch for policy environment and the global or local domestic environment so that we can respond to any shock in the coming period. But in the real sense of it, when you look at what is happening to food inflation, which according to him, it's an improvement. But this is what we need to watch because our numbers must add up. When you look at insecurity, we said that insecurity was one of the factors that has affected a state like Benue State, where they have very high food inflation. But at the same time, we said that food inflation reduced because most parts that inflation affected.
How does that math work? Really.
So it's not hard enough. That's what I'm saying. So I'm going. That is not hard enough. And that is why you see, we need to reconsider the numbers we are basing our decision on. And that is why I say, you see, the most important thing for us as a nation is data. We have left insinuation or how we wish the thing happens. We need to look at the number and the integrity of the number we are releasing as our national number. Because if one hand we say that the insecurity affected states and include Benue State and Niger State, and as a result, they don't have improved output or food prices, I beg your pardon, in those areas has increased. They are now having issues in terms of pricing. Yeah. At the same time, we are saying that food inflation has reduced significantly. You need to add the numbers together. That is why it's important for us to pay attention. Why? It is not just that we want to score a goal that matters. It is that can we sustain what we are saying? And I want to use the opportunity to also call on the government that we need to pay attention to data number one. Is this our real population? Let's conduct population census. Agencies that has to do with numbers, anything data, anything statistics, let's go and re-audit to be sure that, because you see, what exercise that just took place looks common to most people, but to us economists, it's one of the most important economic rituals that could be performed, because this will affect investors, whether they will come to Nigeria or not. Central Bank governor has spoken well to put that confidence in them that if you want to invest, this is the place to be. It's already marketing the nation. But it should, God forbid, that when they come, our numbers are not adding up. So I just say I should put that there, so that when they come, after all the good presentation that we have heard from MPC today, our numbers truly we had up.
Yeah, so definitely a very critical point you brought up there about the data. The data has to be on point, so that we all make, informed decisions from the investor side and even from the government side of things. But, definitely, Mr. Hakeem, looking at everything that's played out, and, since it's still within, expectations at this point, going forward now, he's mentioned the next meeting, that's coming up in July.
Yes.
Yeah, so, definitely a lot will happen before then. What are you seeing? He's said that the currency, that's the Naira, remains competitive, at this point. What are you seeing between now and the next meeting with this decision?
Well, so fully, given what has happened now, we have more time, I would say, to sort of digest what is going on, especially on the global scene. We're already seeing, so there's a current 90-day pause between the US and China. He had paused for the other countries, including Nigeria, maybe like a month before that,
yes.
Right? So hopefully between now and that July, we'll see more clarity around, the future of global trade. So some of the disruptions that followed the introduction of those tariffs by President Trump, hopefully all of those will be resolved. As an oil-producing nation, right? As you probably know, aviation and shipping, consumes about 10% of global crude oil production, right? But given what has happened and how China is sort of, trying to reduce what they push out to the US and all, I'm hoping that between now and July, there will be a lot more clarity around that, because for us as an oil-producing country, we need people to be consuming oil, at least for now, until we can get some other, until we can grow the non-oil exports. So therefore, I'm hoping that within now and maybe July, that there'll be more clarity around that, and that whatever it is that is holding back production in country, I know that, there's been very low investment in that space over the last, call it 10, 15 years or something, that is now biting us today.
Seriously.
But even based on the installed capacity that we have today, we're still not producing. I know that there was the issue in River States that sort of affected production. I'm hoping that they will be able to resolve some of those issues. And as those things get resolved, that as a country, we can then start to look at ourselves. Because if you think about what has happened, for 2025 budgets, right, the government plans to borrow 13 trillion naira. And between January and now, they've done 9 trillion already. Right.
Wow.
Now, and if you have pressure on the revenue side, it then means that if they will maintain all their programs, all their plans regarding spending, then they'll have to borrow more. Now, if rates stay where they are, you and I know what would then happen to the borrowing cost. So I'm hoping that whatever happens between now and July, and I'm hoping that there won't be another major disruption that then sort of, takes away, pivots us into a different direction. Otherwise, the expectation is that, when we come back in July, there will have been another two or three prints, April, May, June, another two prints of inflation. And if the trajectory is maintained and inflation continues to decline, then they then have a chance to start to cut, which will be good for, this sector, the SMEs. I mean, you mentioned earlier, how many people can afford to continue to borrow at 32, 35 sort of levels. So I'm hoping that when that happens, and they start to cut, that some of these businesses who have really suffered these high borrowing costs over the last 1 year, 1 year and a half, will start to get some form of relief.
Yeah, definitely. They did a lot of relief, at this point. And, seeing what's playing out in the U.S., we know everyone's referred to President Donald Trump as a tariff man. But, with his recent tour to the Middle East, he's now been called the salesman. At this point, we see the deals he's been able to, make there, investment pledges in the U.S. He's definitely selling the U.S., at this point. So we're seeing these Middle Eastern countries that are heavily reliant on, oil, at this point, and they are now pivoting towards technology. Yeah. At this time, with trying to get all of those chips, from the U.S. so that they can invest in their, technology in those regions. So looking at us in Africa, oil producers still heavily reliant on oil. How are you seeing that, play, at this point? The Middle East moving to technology and, African nations still focusing on oil and commodities.
In every economy, there are three types of people. Those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who wonder what is happening. For those in the Middle East, is it surprising that over the years, their exchange rate has remained the same? Go and watch. For 80% of the countries, once your currency is affected, it will certainly have implication on the real sector. Our concern here is to understand that economics is made for people. People are not made for economics. So it's not just the number for the number's sake. It is what the number can help improve in the life of the people. So when President Trump went to the Middle East and met perhaps with members of G8 countries, the intention is that what can we get from you? What can they possibly get from America? Currency stability, security, so that they can plan. But what can America get from them? Beyond all the chips investment is petrodollar. You must remain committed to selling your crude in US dollars. When you do that, no matter the pressure that comes to America, America can print your currency and give back to anybody they borrowed from. Because petrodollar was what changed the narrative around the world. For Nigeria and the rest of Africa, what do we have to put on the table? And that is why when President Trump slammed tariff, remember this is not the first time in 2019 he did the same, until COVID came, 2019 to 2020, and threw the whole world in a global shock that we have never experienced in about 10 decades, if you like. But what happened? China understood better now that who can compete with global giants must also be a giant in something. For them, it was a giant in production, in manufacturing. What is Africa giant on? And how can we compete? And that is why, for the next MPC, what will it likely be? We have been hinted, he has already hinted, that we've done about 9 trillion naira in borrowing. Your borrowing, when it goes up, expect high inflation. Maybe in 2 quarters from that. So, will inflation go down? When we possibly need to still borrow money. You saw that when we paid fund that IMF gave us for COVID, what happened the next day? We started raising bonds in all the markets. We started raising treasury bills. Why? We left, so what we did effectively was we left international borrowing and we came back to domestic market to borrow. But that has implication. When we borrow from domestic market and we live in international market, remember that the risk for borrowing outside is currency volatility, exchange rate issues. But when you borrow locally, what is the implication? It's job, creation of job, economic will be affected when it becomes so sporadic. So here is it. There is no easy way out. So the administration came at a time that is really tough. There's no easy way out. And in coming out of the several economic quagmire that is battling with all African countries. One will be the dexterity of policy and those the handler of the same, and promptness in making this policy and knowing when to stop.
Yeah, definitely. So much to unpack there. And, talking about timing, we've heard, President Trump, say some, or call the U.S. Fed chair some very unpleasant names, saying that he needs to cut rates. He needs to cut rates, immediately. And organized private sector here is saying, we also need to cut rates. We need to cut rates at this point. So what's the worst that will happen if we actually look at cutting rates? What's the worst that can happen?
Well, it looks like should I say, the natural next thing to do, especially if inflation starts to drop. But like you mentioned, the fact that they are borrowing more also has inflationary impacts, right? But it appears that it's probably something that we'll have to do at some point in time. What then determines when you do it? There are a lot of considerations. So, for example, if some of these global pressures remain, the CBN will have to think about it very seriously in terms of when to cut. Because if you start to cut, and you cut in such a way that for example, the FPIs that are in country no longer find Nigeria yields attractive, and they start to exit, then you will have created another problem. So they will definitely need to balance these two. They need to stimulate local growth, encourage local industries, SMEs, etc., versus the potential impact that may have on exchange rate.
All right. So, so a lot to consider there before making any kind of decision, at this point. But, I want to thank you both for coming on today. It's been quite an eventful one. And even though nothing happened, something happened. Thank you so much. Mr. Paul Alade, Chief Economist, SPM Professionals, and Mr. Hakeem Mohammed, Executive Director of Global Markets and Institutional Banking, FSDH Merchant Bank. Thank you both for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having us.
And thank you for watching. That's the decision today. Definitely we'll give you updates on reactions to this on our shows tomorrow. Thank you again for watching. I'm Ladi Williams. Remain the team here at Channels HQ. Just bye for now.